The US dollar has ruled the majority of the global trade for the past 80 years. But a bloc of nations called the BRICS is openly challenging that dominance, with the original members as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and new members like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Indonesia on board. Are they acting to end the dollar's supremacy in the global trade? So this video will talk about what actually BRICS is, how is it challenging dollar's supremacy, and is this really happening, or is this just ambitious talks with no practicality? Let's find out. The dollar is by far the world's currency. That means most of the international trades are billed or invoiced in dollars. De-dollarization is the act of reducing that reliance on the dollars. So let us see what is the current status of de-dollarization in the world. De-dollarization is not a new idea. Economists have debated on this idea for decades. But something changed in 2020, or I can say after 2020, which actually accelerated this trend of de-dollarization. So the first turning point after 2020 was the weaponization of the dollar, or I could say the weaponization of the dollar by the USA. So when the US sanctioned Russia after Russia invaded Ukraine, then the world saw the power of the United States dollar's financial dominance. Overnight, the Russian banks were frozen out of SWIFT, the international payment system. So Russia struggled to sell oil and gas in dollars, and in fact, any trade deal in US dollars. And oil and gas contributed significantly to Russia's federal budget, accounting for roughly 30 to 35% of total budget revenue in 2024. For many countries who were watching, the message was quite clear. If it can happen to Russia, it can happen to them also. Then came the second shock of the US tariffs, or rather I should say Mr. Donald Trump. So by slapping tariffs on imports, Mr. Trump made trade with the USA more expensive and unpredictable. So although the full brunt of the tariffs has not been felt yet due to traders storing large stocks of goods and also due to the temporary nature of the tariffs, but uncertainty has seeped into the nerves of global traders for the US economy. And in the background, I mean, along with these US sanctions and the tariffs, in the background, something else was gaining momentum, the BRICS nations, which was developing and growing in the background. So what started as a group of 5 emerging economies has now grown into a group of 11 member nations. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and most recently Indonesia have joined the club. And together they represent 40% of the GDP of the world. And that is massive, a counterweight to the G7 nations. At their latest summit in Rio, the BRICS leaders not only discussed about cooperation, but also how to reduce their reliance on the US dollars. So how exactly the BRICS nations plan to bypass the dollar? Let's see. So first is the BRICS Pay. If you know the SWIFT payment platform, then the BRICS Pay is aimed by the BRICS nations to act as an alternative to the SWIFT. So this is a payment network which is built on the blockchain technology, and blockchain is the same technology on which cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum function. So basically this payment network can be used by the BRICS nations to trade in local currencies. So as per the reports, Iran and Venezuela have tested trades using BRICS Pay without touching a single US dollar. So basically, if the BRICS Pay is a success, then BRICS countries and even more countries beyond BRICS also will be able to trade in local currencies other than the US dollars, and hence reducing the reliance on US dollars. So the second big move of de-dollarization after the BRICS Pay is happening in the commodity markets. So a growing share of energy and raw materials is being priced in non-dollar currencies. So take Russian oil for example. After the US sanctions on Russia, most of the Russian oil exports to countries like India, China and Turkey are being settled in local currencies or currencies of Russians' friendly partners. And it's not just oil. According to JP Morgan Insights, some Indian companies have begun importing Russian coal directly in Chinese yuan without even involving the Chinese banks or intermediaries. So reportedly, China and Russia are already settling energy and oil deals in gold-backed tokens. This creates a win-win situation actually. For Russia, this means keeping the trade flowing despite the US sanctions, often by offering discounts to the buyers willing to bypass the dollars. For India, China, Turkey, all those countries which are importing oil from Russia, it reduces the need to stockpile the US dollars just to pay for the imports. Instead, those reserves can be freed up for infrastructure, healthcare, and education projects at home. Now, let's also look at the foreign exchange reserves, the money that the central banks keep to pay for imports, stabilize their currencies, and for other international commitments and exigencies or emergencies. For decades, the US dollar was a backbone of these reserves. In the 1990s to 2000s, the US dollar made up to around 70 to 73% of the foreign exchange reserves. That figure has dropped to 47 to 58% now in 2025. Now, this decline in the foreign exchange reserves of the US dollars is not completely new. This is not something that we have seen for the first time. In fact, in the early 1990s, the dollar's share in the foreign exchange reserves dropped to below 60% before bouncing back when the euro was created in 1999. But even so, the dollar and the euro still dominate the global reserves by a wide margin, and the Chinese yuan is still at around 2 to 3%. So what's different this time, and why are we saying that this time it is eluding of a de-dollarization? Well, the game lies in the fact that central banks are not moving into other currencies, they are moving into gold. So in the last 3 years, central banks have been buying gold at the fastest pace known over half a century. And why? Because unlike currencies, gold cannot be sanctioned, frozen, or printed endlessly by politicians. So gold is now seen as a fresh alternative to debt-heavy currencies like the dollar and the euro. The numbers are striking and tell the same story. In emerging markets, gold now makes up about 9% of foreign exchange reserves, more than double the 4% level a decade ago. For developed markets, the gold share is even larger at around 20%. So all these events that we discussed sound impressive, but the road to the heaven is still long. It is true that the dollar has lost its share in trade invoicing, in foreign exchange reserves and the bond market, but still the share of the dollar is significantly bigger than its competitors like the euro, Chinese yuan or the British pounds. The BRICS pay and the BRICS currency is still to come, and we'll see what happens to that. Currently, 54% of the world's exports is invoiced in dollars, as against 30% in euro, 4% each in British pounds, Japanese yen, and Chinese yuan. Let's also compare the share of currencies in the global forex reserves. So the US dollar is at 47 to 58%, euro is at 24%, Japanese yen is at 5%, pound sterling is at 4.73%, Chinese yuan is at barely 2%, and other BRICS currencies, which includes rupee, ruble, rand, they are statistically negligible. Add to it, the approach that the BRICS nations are following is in fact scattered. India, if you see, is cautious about China's dominance and is cautiously moving forward to de-dollarization. In August of 2025, the Reserve Bank of India launched the Global Rupee Trading System, where foreign institutions can now open Vostro accounts in Indian banks and they can trade internationally using the Indian rupee. But everything said aside, this is for sure that the BRICS nations have actually conclusively started working to dethrone the dollar. Like the euro was created in 1999, and now the BRICS nations, which are actually, as we know, that they account for 40% of the world's GDP. So that's a big number in play here. And if they continue with the same rate as they are moving ahead, then the time is not far. There is an alternate currency to the US dollar. Yes, the dollar is not vanishing overnight. The US dollar still controls the majority of the trade invoicing happening globally and the majority of the foreign exchange reserves in the world. But we should remember that there is a shift happening. There is an endeavor by a bloc of nations who represent 40% of the world's GDP. If they happen to succeed in their endeavors like the BRICS pay, and they're actually able to fade in all those differences amongst themselves, like for India and China especially, then it is not far that we can see an alternative of the dollar. And especially with America's ballooning debt and unpredictable policies, the idea of a post-dollar world doesn't sound too fascinating. Thanks for watching. If you like, please subscribe and like this video and comment your thoughts. Thank you.